6 months after everything fell apart, that first $50 hit my bank account. Just $50. But let me tell you, that transaction was more satisfying than any six-figure bonus I'd ever earned. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about seeing a pattern finally broken, a cost finally paid. And to truly understand why that tiny sum felt like a triumph, why it was the quiet, definitive end to years of chaos, we need to go back to a Tuesday night in Phoenix, Arizona. I was sitting in one of those trendy downtown spots, the kind where the music is just loud enough you have to lean in to talk, nursing a beer that had gone warm about 20 minutes ago. My fiancée, Chloe, was across the bar. She was in this black dress I'd told her looked amazing just hours earlier, leaning in close to Jake, the bartender. And then she did it. Right there, in front of everyone, with the engagement ring I'd spent 6 months saving for sparkling on her finger, she looked at me, smiled, and subtly, almost deliberately, slipped a cocktail napkin with Jake's number into her purse. And the weirdest part? I didn't feel angry. Not really. It was more like a puzzle piece I'd been trying to force into the wrong spot for months finally clicked into place. Not a violent click, just a quiet, sickening alignment. For years together, 8 months engaged, a wedding venue booked with a $12,000 non-refundable deposit. And apparently, none of that meant a thing when some guy with forearm tattoos and a craft cocktail menu started paying attention. My buddy, David, was sitting across from me, doing that thing where he pretends to check his phone but you know he's watching the same train wreck you are. He probably wondered if he should say something, or just let me process whatever the hell this moment was turning into. I should have seen it coming. Chloe had been on her phone all night, before we even got there, smiling at the screen, angling it away whenever I glanced over. That subtle, shifty move people do when they're texting someone they shouldn't be, thinking you're too stupid to notice. When we walked in, she beelined for the bar, not the table, said she wanted to check out their signature drinks with way too much enthusiasm for someone who usually just orders vodka sodas. Jake was exactly the type you'd expect, mid-20s, man bun, sleeve tattoos, that confident smirk of a guy who's used to getting attention and knows how to work it. He was mixing her some elaborate drink with muddled herbs, taking way longer than necessary, and she was eating up every second of it. David finally put his phone down and caught my eye with a look that said, "We can leave." But I just shook my head. I needed to see how far this would actually go. The answer came about 10 minutes later. Chloe giggled like she was 17 instead of 28 and tucked that napkin into her purse with all the discretion of someone who either didn't care about getting caught or genuinely thought I couldn't see her from 15 feet away. That's when I stood up and walked over. Not because I wanted to cause a scene, but because I was done pretending this wasn't happening. I didn't even make it fully to the bar before Chloe spun around and hit me with, "What? Are you checking up on me now?" Her tone was so defensive it confirmed everything I needed to know. I just said I was ready to go, kept my voice level. Didn't take the bait. She rolled her eyes so hard I'm surprised she didn't strain something and snapped, "I'm having fun, Alex. Go sit down," like I was her dad instead of the guy she was supposed to marry in 4 months. Jake, the bartender, had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable and busied himself washing glasses, probably hoping this wouldn't turn into a social media drama. I told her again that I was leaving. She could come or not. Her choice. That's when she said it. Loud enough that the couple at the next table definitely heard. "You're not my husband. You don't own me." The words hung in the air for a second. I swear the whole bar seemed to pause, like someone had hit a cosmic button. I didn't yell. Didn't argue. Just looked at her for maybe 5 seconds that felt like an hour, then said, "You're right about one of those things." And I turned around. David was already grabbing his jacket, throwing cash on our table, moving with the kind of efficiency that told me he'd been waiting for an exit cue. Chloe called after me. Something about me being controlling and insecure, but I was already pushing through the door into the cool night air that felt like the first real breath I'd taken in hours. David caught up to me half a block down. Didn't say anything, just walked next to me while I processed what had just happened. The walk to my car took maybe 3 minutes, but my brain was running through 4 years of relationship highlights like a movie montage. Except now every sweet moment had this weird, bitter aftertaste, because I was seeing it all through new eyes. We'd met at a mutual friend's barbecue, one of those perfect summer days where everything feels possible. She'd laughed at my joke about potato salad, and I'd thought she was the most beautiful person I'd ever seen. The first year was amazing. The second year was good. The third year had some bumps, but what relationship doesn't? And this past year, if I'm being honest, had been me making excuses for why things fell off while telling myself wedding planning was just stressful. David finally spoke up when we got to my car. "So, what are you going to do?" And I surprised myself by knowing exactly what I was going to do. I told him I needed his truck. He asked when. I said, "Tonight." He handed me his keys without another question. That's the kind of friend he was. He said he'd meet me at my place in Queens in an hour and called an Uber home. I drove back to the loft in Brooklyn I'd shared with Chloe for 2 years, parked in my usual spot, and sat in the car for maybe 10 minutes, just thinking. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse. Exposed brick, big windows, the kind of place that looked great on Instagram and cost way more than it should. I'd signed the lease, my name, my credit score, my security deposit. I walked up those stairs for what I decided would be one of the last times and unlocked the door to our home that suddenly didn't feel like home anymore. Everything looked different now, like I was seeing it all for the first time. The couch I bought when I got my first real job. The coffee table I'd assembled at 2 in the morning because the delivery guys wouldn't bring it upstairs. The TV I'd saved up for. The kitchen knives I'd gotten as a birthday gift from my parents. The espresso machine I'd researched for 3 weeks before buying. I started doing a mental inventory and realized that maybe 80% of everything in this apartment was mine. Paid for by me, chosen by me, assembled by me. Chloe had contributed some decorative pillows, a few plants that I watered, and a bunch of framed photos of us that now felt like evidence in a case I was building against my own judgment. My phone buzzed with texts I didn't read. Probably Chloe, wondering where I'd gone, or more likely, still at the bar with Jake. David showed up right on schedule with his truck and didn't ask questions, just said, "Where do we start?" and grabbed the hand truck from his back seat. We worked fast, efficient, like we were running a heist, except we were stealing my own stuff from my own apartment. The couch went first, then the TV, then the coffee table, then the kitchen stuff, then my clothes, then my books, then everything else that was mine, down to the last charging cable and coffee mug. It took us maybe 3 hours to strip that place down to basically Chloe's stuff and the furniture that came with the unit. And let me tell you, what was left looked pretty sad. I saved one thing for last. Sat down at the kitchen counter with a piece of paper and a pen and wrote words that felt like the most honest thing I'd said in months. "You're right. I don't own you, and you don't own my paycheck either." I left it right in the middle of the empty counter where she couldn't miss it. Took one last look around and walked out. David locked up behind me. I slid my key under the door and we loaded the last box into his truck. He asked where I was going. I said I'd figure it out. He said I could crash at his place until I did. We drove away from that apartment at almost 2 in the morning, and I felt lighter than I had in a year. I ended up crashing on David's couch, couldn't sleep. Just staring at the ceiling and replaying the last year in my head like a detective going through case files, looking for clues he'd missed. The thing about red flags is they're only obvious when you finally stop making excuses for them. And brother, I had been making excuses like it was my full-time job. It started maybe 6 months ago with these happy hours that turned into late nights. Chloe rolling in at 11 or midnight, smelling like bar olives and cheap wine. Making excuses about traffic, or a coworker's birthday, or some story that seemed plausible enough if you didn't think too hard. I'd wanted to believe her, because that's what you do when you love someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt. Even when the doubt is doing backflips and waving red flags. Then came the Instagram posts from apartments I didn't recognize. Group photos where she was always standing just a little too close to guys I'd never heard of. Captions about living her best life that felt like they were written by someone who'd forgotten she was engaged. I'd asked about it once, casual-like, and she'd hit me with the paranoia card, in that tone that made me feel like I was the problem for even noticing. Her phone became this protected fortress around 3 months ago. Changed her passcode, started tilting the screen away when notifications came in, taking calls in the other room, like she was handling classified information. She'd take off her engagement ring before going out, said it got in the way when she was dancing, or it didn't match her outfit, or some other excuse that sounded reasonable until you added it to the pile of other reasonable excuses that, together, painted a pretty unreasonable picture. The financial stuff, though, that's what really got me when I sat down and actually looked at the numbers the morning after I moved out. I make $90,000 a year as a project manager at a tech company. Good job, stable, benefits, the whole package. Chloe makes $35,000, working part-time at a marketing startup. And I'd never cared about the income difference because relationships aren't supposed to be about who makes what. Except somewhere along the way, it became about exactly that, just not in any way I'd agreed to. I paid 70% of the rent on that apartment, which came out to about $1,400 a month, while she paid $600. I covered all the utilities, internet, streaming services, groceries most of the time. Dinners out because she was saving for the wedding, even though I'd also put down the venue deposit, and paid for her dress, and was covering the honeymoon. I opened my Venmo history that morning and just stared at it for a solid 10 minutes. Transaction after transaction going back 2 years, like a financial diary of a relationship where I was apparently the only one investing. There was even one from a month ago for $50 with a note, for emotional labor. At the time, I'd thought it was a joke. But now, it felt like a preview of the kind of person I'd been planning to marry. Would you stay with someone who literally charged you for having feelings? The math was ugly when I actually did it. Sitting there at David's kitchen table with a spreadsheet I built because that's what project managers do when their life falls apart. We make documentation. 28 months of covering her share when she claimed she was short. $2,500 in direct loans that she'd promised to pay back after the wedding. And another $1,800 in stuff I'd bought for us that only she used. I took screenshots of everything, organized them in folders, added up the totals, and created a paper trail that would make an accountant weep with joy. David came out of his bedroom around 9, took one look at me surrounded by bank statements and receipts, and just started making coffee without saying a word. The plan came together over that coffee, clear and simple, like all good plans should be. I'd document everything, not because I wanted the money back, but because I knew what was coming. Chloe wasn't the type to take rejection quietly. She'd spin this into a story where I was the villain, controlling and possessive, and probably a bunch of other things she'd workshop with her friends until it sounded convincing. I needed proof. Needed timestamps. Needed a record of who paid for what and when. Needed evidence that I wasn't abandoning her, but extracting myself from a situation where I'd become a walking ATM with feelings she'd stopped caring about. The rest of my stuff was still at the apartment. Clothes I hadn't grabbed, some books, random things I'd forgotten in the rush to get out. I texted the landlord, explained the situation in professional terms that didn't make me sound crazy, said I needed to break the lease and I'd cover whatever cost that involved. He responded within an hour, said he'd seen this kind of thing before. Asked if I wanted him to change the locks. I said not yet. I needed to get the rest of my things first, but I appreciated the offer. David and I went back that afternoon when I knew Chloe would be at work, used my key one last time, and cleared out everything else that mattered to me. The apartment looked even sadder in daylight, like a stage set after the play ended and they'd started removing props. I left her the cheap bookshelf that was falling apart anyway. The decorative pillows she'd bought, the photos of us that I didn't want anymore, and a lamp with a broken switch I'd been meaning to fix for 6 months. I took my good kitchen knives, my coffee grinder, my backup phone charger, my winter jackets, and the blanket my mom had made me for Christmas 3 years ago. I found the cocktail napkin with Jake's number on it sitting on her nightstand like a trophy. Didn't even feel anything looking at it. Just took a photo for my records and left it there. We were in and out in 40 minutes, efficient and thorough. And I locked the door behind me knowing I'd never open it again. My social media went dark, not deleted, but logged out. Because I didn't need to see whatever narrative was being constructed about why I'd abandoned my fiancé in the middle of the night. David ordered pizza, and we watched basketball. Didn't talk about Chloe or the apartment or any of it. Just existed in the kind of comfortable silence that good friends can share when words would just be noise anyway. The attempt to destroy my reputation started exactly when I knew it would. Approximately 18 hours after she came home to that empty apartment and realized I wasn't coming back. My work email got a message from HR asking if I had a minute to chat. Casual and friendly, but with that undertone that meant someone had said something about me that required official attention. I walked into that office already knowing what was coming. Sat down across from Sarah in HR and waited for her to tell me that my ex-fiancé had called claiming I'd stolen her belongings and abandoned her without warning. Sarah looked uncomfortable, did that thing where she clicked her pen a few times before talking, and asked if I wanted to explain my side of the situation. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder I'd prepared, and showed her the lease with only my name on it. The receipts for every piece of furniture I'd taken. The Venmo history. The bank statements. And the timeline I'd built documenting the last 6 months of our relationship falling apart. She looked through everything for maybe 10 minutes, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something like sympathy, and finally said the company had no concerns and apologized for having to ask. Chloe tried the police next, filed some kind of report about stolen property that went exactly nowhere once they saw the same documentation I'd shown HR. The officer who called me sounded bored, said it was clearly a civil matter between people who'd lived together, told me to keep my records handy just in case. And that was the end of it. Then came the social media post. The nuclear option for someone who'd run out of official channels and decided public opinion was the next battlefield. She wrote this whole essay about emotional mistreatment and financial control, about a partner who'd isolated her and then left her with nothing, painted herself as a victim of some calculated manipulation that would have been convincing if you didn't know any of the actual facts. Tagged mutual friends, used phrases she'd clearly Googled specifically for maximum impact. The post got maybe 40 likes in the first hour. Comments from her friends saying they'd always known something was off about me, asking what they could do to help, sharing resources for people in bad situations. I sat in David's living room watching this narrative build in real time and didn't feel angry, just tired, like I was watching someone dig a hole they didn't realize I had a ladder out of. David asked if I was going to respond, and I said no. I was going to do something better. He made a post of his own, simple and factual. Said he'd been there the night at the bar, seen what happened, helped me move my own belongings out of my own apartment, and that anyone interested in the full story should message him directly. Then he posted screenshots. Not all of them, just enough to show the Venmo requests, the lease agreement, the text from Chloe asking for money, the financial reality of who'd been supporting whom. Her narrative didn't just crack, it shattered like a windshield hit with a brick, and suddenly those supportive comments turned into questions she couldn't answer. Her dad called me 3 days later. Michael, a guy I'd always respected, asked if we could meet for coffee because he'd seen everything online and wanted to hear my version directly. We met at a place in Manhattan, neutral territory, and I brought printed copies of everything because I wasn't leaving anything to memory or interpretation. He looked through it all, asked a few clarifying questions, and then sat back in his chair with this expression of a man realizing his daughter had become someone he didn't recognize. Michael told me he'd raised her better than this, apologized for the chaos she'd created, and asked what he could do to make it right. I said the lease needed to be broken, there'd be penalties. I'd already talked to the landlord about it. He wrote me a check right there for the full amount, said it was the least he could do, shook my hand, and left looking about 10 years older than when he'd arrived. The conversation with Chloe happened 2 weeks after that. Not because I wanted it, but because she ambushed me at the cafe near David's place where I'd started working in the mornings. She looked different, tired, maybe less put together than the girl who'd flirted with a bartender while wearing my ring. Sat down across from me without asking, started talking about how we could work things out, how she'd made mistakes. But so had I. How 4 years together meant something, and we shouldn't throw it away over one bad night. I let her finish, didn't interrupt, just listened to this rehearsed speech that probably sounded convincing in her head. When she was done, I asked her one question. Do you remember what you told your friend about why you were marrying me? Her face went pale because she knew exactly what I was talking about. A month before the bar incident, she'd been at brunch with her best friend, gotten a little too honest over mimosas, and said she was only marrying me because it was easier than starting over. Because I was stable and safe and would take care of her even if the spark was gone. Her friend had felt guilty enough about that conversation to reach out to me after everything went down, sent me screenshots, said she'd thought I deserved to know the truth. Have you ever found out someone you love saw you as convenient rather than special? I told Chloe the wedding was cancelled. The deposits were lost. The relationship was over. And nothing she said was going to change any of those facts. She tried anger next, said I was vindictive and cruel, that I'd ruined her reputation and turned people against her. I reminded her that I'd never posted anything, never told my side publicly, just provided evidence when she tried to destroy me first. Told her she'd done this to herself, and I was just declining to be collateral damage in her victim story. She left crying, and I went back to my coffee feeling nothing but relief that I'd never have to have that conversation again. Life moved on faster than I expected. Found a new apartment within a month. 1 bedroom, affordable, mine alone, with no ghosts of a failed relationship haunting the furniture. Started hitting the gym again, something I'd let slide during the engagement planning, and remembered what it felt like to invest time in myself instead of pouring it into someone who saw me as a resource to extract rather than a partner to build with. Met someone new about 3 months later. Nothing serious yet, just coffee and conversation with a woman who paid for her own drinks and didn't check her phone every 5 minutes waiting for attention from strangers. The call came 6 months after I'd moved out. Chloe's number on my screen after I'd unblocked it a few weeks earlier, figuring enough time had passed that she couldn't do any more damage. She was crying. Real crying, not manipulative crying, the kind where you can barely get words out between sobs. Said she'd messed up everything and needed help. Jake had disappeared after a month when he realized she came with complications and expectations. Her friends had distanced themselves after the truth came out. Her parents were disappointed and keeping her at arm's length. The real kicker, though, was the debt. She'd racked up $25,000 on credit cards trying to maintain the lifestyle she'd been living when I was covering 70% of her expenses. Plus, she'd had to take over full rent on the apartment until the lease ended 2 months after I left. She asked if I could loan her money, just enough to get back on her feet. Promised she'd pay it back. Said I was the only person she could turn to. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. Remembered every Venmo request. Every late night she'd blamed on happy hour. Every time she'd made me feel crazy for noticing obvious red flags. Then I told her I'd help. But only under very specific conditions. She'd sign a legal promissory note for any amount I sent her, with a payment plan of $50 a month until the debt was cleared. And she'd acknowledge in writing that this was repayment for the $2,500 in loans she'd never paid back, plus interest for emotional damages. She agreed immediately, desperate enough to accept any terms, probably thinking I'd send her a few thousand to help with the credit cards. I sent her exactly $50 with a note that said, "This is month 1 of 50. Which would take her just over 4 years to repay the original loans she promised to give back after the wedding that never happened. Not a penny more, not a penny less. Just a monthly reminder that actions have prices, and I wasn't paying hers anymore. She tried calling back, sent texts saying that wasn't what she meant, that she needed real help, but I'd already said everything I needed to say. I sold the engagement ring a week later, got about 60% of what I'd paid for it, and used the money to book a trip to Iceland I'd always wanted to take but had postponed for wedding planning. The first payment of $50 hit my account right on schedule. And I smiled. Knowing she'd be sending that payment for years. A monthly reminder of what it costs to treat someone like an ATM while hunting for upgrades. The real lesson isn't about revenge. It's about recognizing your worth and refusing to subsidize someone else's disrespect. When someone shows you they value convenience over commitment, believe them and protect yourself accordingly. Self-respect isn't about getting even. It's about refusing to participate in relationships where you're the only one investing while they're already shopping for exits. What would you have done if you were in my shoes?